Own Way, the podcast with me, your host, Kori McClurg.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This is Get Out of Your Own Way, the podcast. I am Kori McClurg, your host and author of the book, Get Out of Your Own Way. So, today we're going to talk about therapy. And when I say that, I mean like talk therapy, not like physical therapy. I am pro physical therapy though, so don't ignore it. Do your exercises. You can always go to physical therapy, even if it's not ordered by the doctor. Yes, you will have to pay for out of it pocket, but it's probably worth it. But seriously, talk therapy. So, and I'll actually maybe broaden that a little bit to just, not just talk therapy, but anything that's meant to be sort of mentally supportive, address mental health. And I feel like there is so much confusion around this, and still, even to this day, so much, shame, kind of, I don't know, some sort of taint, like, to it. And I wanted to unpack all this today. There's a variety, right, of professionals that can essentially provide therapy for mental health. I mean, you have everything from, counselors, licensed therapists, all the way up to a psychiatrist, who is somebody who's gone to medical school and can prescribe medication. There are PhDs, right, in psychology. So it's kind of a broad path for people who are just interested in maybe, helping people with mental health. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it can automatically be assumed that because somebody had more education, that they're necessarily going to be able to help you with your issue more effectively. A lot of times the further you go in education, you get really specialized, right? And so, and that specialty isn't necessarily, necessarily in the particular issue, that you have, or perhaps it's just overkill. If you're looking into therapy because you kind of just want more support, you just want like somebody to talk to on a weekly basis, you want a safe space, that's a totally different deal than somebody who is maybe experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, or dealing with some kind of recurring depressive episodes, or mania or something, right? I mean, it's such a wide variety and of help that's available, and those in such a wide variety of specialty. And I think that's probably where a lot of confusion, I think, comes from. When from the neck down, right, we have specialty and subspecialty, and there's just all kinds of ways that we can sort of slice and dice, so to speak, the body to address whatever issue it is. And we have a very kind of specific method for diagnoses, right? And the unfortunate thing is that in mental health, that's not necessarily the case. It certainly has not been my experience, and maybe in some practices this does exist. But, it's not necessarily the case where you kind of go to your general practitioner like you would, your regular family doctor. And then when the family doctor's like, hey, this seems to exceed my, scope of practice. And then that person refers you to, the specialist that you need to see. You get a problem with your foot. It's obviously something out of the scope of the GP. And so they say, yeah, you need to go to a podiatrist. That's not necessarily what happens in mental health. You don't start out with, a licensed counselor And then they necessarily identify that you need some sort of specialist in trauma therapy, and then, they refer you out. Potentially it could, it probably depends on the level of education or just awareness, or just experience, whatever, from that counselor to be able to refer you on. But I would say it's a much looser kind of structure than we see in, what I'll say is like traditional medical practice. So you as a consumer, as a client, as a patient, really need to be aware of the fact that it's still kind of loosey-goosey out there, and that the person that you see isn't necessarily going to be able to diagnose your specific issue or the thing that's probably driving, right, a lot of these other issues, and then refer you on. So you kind of have to be educated a bit about, who it is that you're seeing and kind of what their limitations are going to be. And I don't think there's anything wrong with trying it out, right? I mean, it might be something where you really don't know where to start, and I think that's totally fine. You don't know where to start, so you just start somewhere, right? I don't think you're ever going to go wrong with starting, even if ultimately that person's not that person's not going to be able to help you with what turns out to be potentially the specific thing that you have going on. So nothing wrong with that. And then I think when you start out, when you get into it with them, I think you kind of just start talking to them about it. Like, hey, it seems like we're not quite hitting on the thing. Like, it still seems like, I'm still struggling with X, right? Or it still seems like Y continues to come up for me, and it feels like there's something else below the surface that we're not quite hitting on. And, talk more about it. I mean, they might not, for whatever reason, the words that you're using or whatever aren't triggering them to clue in to the fact that there's this other thing going on. I think the thing is you got to be open, and you just got to kind of put things out there and say, what do you think about this? And ultimately you got to feel good about, maybe they're it, maybe they're not it, and that it's okay for you to, keep trying. I certainly don't think that's ever going to be a wasted thing for you to, keep trying. I know I'll tell you, I'll be straight up honest with you. I've been in therapy for years and years. I've gone through a few different therapists. Yeah, sometimes it can be super frustrating to look back in some of those early years to recognize that some of those therapists did not clue in to some of the things that were probably more pertinent to what the real issues were. And so that can be frustrating. But if I hadn't started, I wouldn't have, where would I be? I'd still be sitting in, the mess. And it would have never finally gotten to some of the more productive, maybe, sessions with different therapists. So yeah, just know that it's not a silver bullet, and it's not quite as, what's the word? It's the model, right? It does not mimic, the rest of Western medicine. And I think, there's a whole host of reasons for that. I think our general understanding of the brain is way behind, probably some other areas of our understanding, of our collective understanding, of the rest of our body. So, that's just kind of the state of the state. But you as a consumer, as a client, as a patient, do need to understand, and even when you go to the doctor, you're your own best advocate. So you being as educated as a layperson can be is always going to be in your best interest. I know that physicians hate it when you are WebMDing yourself. And for good reason. I totally appreciate why that's frustrating. But also it just helps you ask questions. If you go into it like, a student, right, as a curious person and not like more than the physician, than the therapist, then I think that's going to be a productive conversation. They're going to be more open. And frankly, I've found that people in those positions, they appreciate you asking smart questions. They appreciate you wanting to know more and like letting them educate you more. So I think it's all comes down to kind of your attitude and approach when it comes to that. But again, sometimes you're just not going to know until you're in it and until you kind of start unearthing things. I know one of the things I struggled with even in therapy for a long time was just feeling like, this constant, questioning of myself and feeling like, oh, that's not pertinent, or like shutting myself down before I could even tell it to a therapist, or just generally feeling wrong, about it. Having a whole bunch of hangups about the fact that I was even in therapy. Why can't I just suck it up and, move on and be tough and, be productive. But I can tell you right now that none of that is helpful. That kind of attitude is super unhelpful, and absolutely counterproductive, to, your own well-being. So don't do that, please. Please, love, kindness, and compassion for yourself is always like the best method. One thing though, I do want you to be wary of is, just because somebody says something that you don't like, that perhaps they're challenging you a bit, your therapist is challenging you. That's not a bad thing, right? It's also not going to help you to have somebody who doesn't help you to see yourself, or who just is an ear and nothing else. We want to make progress, right? We want to kind of be able to get through these things that are troubling us, that are causing us difficulty in our day-to-day lives, or help us change our behavior, whatever it is. And so, you want somebody to challenge you and to help you be objective about it and help you see what's really going on for you. So just because they say something that you don't like occasionally isn't necessarily a reason to, to kick that therapist to the curb and move on. I would say there's certainly a level of healthy, challenge that you want to have happen. But at the end, if you feel like you're not being listened to, or it's just not a good fit, or you've hit the end of their expertise, then by all means, you should have that conversation and just say, hey, I just kind of feel like I want to try, something else. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, to try something else. And as it relates to, just therapy broadly, again, getting educated about, who is it that you're considering seeing, doing some Google searches about what you think might be going on for you. You don't necessarily have to diagnose yourself, but just some descriptions of like the challenges that you're facing, with your mental health, and trying to really ferret it in, because even in the broad world of I'll call therapists in general, everyone does kind of have a specialty. You can go to a therapist who, they're licensed to practice, but they basically know very little to nothing about like trauma, for example. So if you've been through some traumatic events, or, then, that's probably not the person for you to go see. You want somebody who really is talking about the potential that trauma has impacted you. Or if you have questions about sexuality or relationships, or you're looking for somebody who specializes in like, or that part of your problem is like in a relationship that you're having now. So then like you want to see somebody who does couples therapy, or you want to see somebody who does understand, who specializes in these like these issues of confused sexuality and stuff. Like there really are these kind of subspecialties, if you will, where you want to look out and you try to find that person who is educated. You know, they've gone out of their way to get more educated in a specific type of issue. And so that's who you want to try to seek out. And there's not necessarily going to be like a credential associated with that kind of sort of, you know, subspecialty, if you will. They might speak like on their website about some of that other education that they've done, you know, that area of interest that they have really kind of honed in on. And they will probably talk about that, you know, on their website. Like, hey, I learned from, you know, so-and-so, and I learned from so-and-so, and I, you know, am steeped in the principles of blah, blah, blah. And those are the kind of things that you want to try to, you know, hone in on. Like, you know, one area of therapy that I find a relatively large contingent of is like spiritual based kind of therapists, like therapists who ground their understanding of their understanding of the brain and therapeutic principles. But they also have certain religious principles that they adhere to, you know, whether that be Christianity. And so oftentimes that's helpful because, you know, if you're looking for a therapist, you want them to understand that this thing is important to you, and you want to get their perspective on how, you know, these two things intersect. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with like seeking out that kind of subspecialty, that kind of framework, that kind of context, because ultimately your therapy is going to be more successful the more you're able to have like a common language, just kind of a connection with this person, even if you don't really, you know them. If it seems like they understand you better, that's all going to be so much more helpful in having you sort of progress through some of the whatever issues, you know, it is that you're having. You know, the other thing I want to talk about is like, how long should you be in therapy, and what sort of goals, you know, should you have for therapy? And I know this has kind of been long debated, like this kind of the idea that like, well, you know, at some point you should be sort of fixed and you shouldn't need therapy anymore. And I see one side of this, but I'm also a little challenged with this. So there may very well be an initial, you know, issue, complaint, whatever symptom that you're going to therapy for. And for sure that it may be such that you focus in on this symptom and you work through until you resolve, right, that symptom. However, it may very well be that you discover that this symptom really is a symptom, and that there is another underlying issue that perhaps needs more work to get to the bottom of. So, and I think substance use is a good example of this. So, you know, you might start therapy because you feel like, I don't like my relationship with alcohol or food. You know, that's another big one. But I guarantee you that substance really is not the problem. I mean, certainly it's a problem because it's masking, right, what the underlying issue is. But when you resolve the underlying issue, it's so much easier to resolve the symptom. And it may very well, don't get me wrong, it may very well be the case, and I would advocate that it is, that abstinence from that substance definitely helps you have a clearer mind such that you can observe what the underlying issue is. But many times, and I would hazard a guess that a lot of therapists say this is how it goes. Somebody comes to them for a specific issue, but over the course of their work discover that, it is really adjacent to what the core issue is. So, don't get discouraged or upset because this is taking longer than you envisioned. Try to pull yourself back and have this recognition of the fact that, yeah, I was complaining about this one thing, but we've kind of unearthed some other stuff that I need to be working on and figure out. Also, I don't think there's anything wrong with continuing to see a therapist just for the support. So, and maybe some would argue that at that point it's more of a coaching role, and I don't disagree with that. And that maybe even somebody might be more effective as a coach than your therapist might be, and that all might be very well true. My point being that I don't think there's anything wrong with, continuing to seek support from a person, that you have a professional relationship with, as in, a client paying a professional, because you simply want that outside perspective from somebody who is more educated in the role of mental health and the role that it's playing in, your circumstances from week to week. So there's two sides of this coin, and I think you're just going to have to kind of feel that out as you're going into it. And also, if you feel like you went into it for a certain reason and you're not making progress, you've been weeks and weeks and weeks, there's no progress being made. It seems like you're talking about the same stuff every week and there's no new ideas introduced. Then yeah, maybe you just don't have, therapists are like everybody else, right? There's good ones, there's bad ones, there's ones that don't work for you. So there's nothing wrong also with just saying, I don't think this person is it for me. It doesn't feel like we're making progress. I was really hoping for more guidance. I was really hoping for more ideas. I think I'm going to try something new. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's all about trying, different situations, different people, trying to get as educated as you can be, as a lay person, and yeah, just kind of muddling your way through. But look, mental health is important. There's no doubt about it. We can't pretend that our brain isn't as important as every other organ. It is. And, it controls everything. It drives everything in your life. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest it drives your physical health as well. So don't mess around with it. It's real. And you're going to have to kind of trial and error to find what works for you, what support works for you, what educational background of a therapist works for you. It's going to be some trial and error. So don't get disheartened if hey, everything isn't magically fixed in 16 weeks. You're probably going to have to continue to work at it. But again, I think the most important thing is there should never be any stigma around it. There should, if you feel that, amongst your family, friends, whatever, and you feel like you don't want to tell them because of that, hey, that's your call. But please know that there's so many of us who have found value in it, and who appreciate the insights of another person who is highly educated in how the brain and the mind works, and how we develop, as humans. We appreciate that perspective and we appreciate that education, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. In fact, I would say you're ahead of the game if you are going down that path, and so there should never be any stigma around it. I highly encourage it. So yeah, therapy. Do it. Just be educated about it. Just definitely be educated about it. Do your research. As with everything, I am pro research. I am pro information. So anyway, you guys have a great week, and I will talk to you later.